Thank you so much. And I now recognize the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Haaland. She's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Nash, Mr. Jenkins, Ms. Johnson-Blanco, and Reverend Dr. Barber, who is no longer here, thank you for your wisdom and truth, for being here, and for your dedication to fighting this extremely important issue. Over the past decade, many states have decreased people's access to voting by closing and moving polling places. Last September, a report from the Leadership Conference found that southern states have closed more than 1,000 polling sites since the Supreme Court's ruling in Shelby County versus Holder removed pre-clearance requirements from states that have historically disenfranchised black voters. And you can see it up on the screen. This is a map from the Leadership Conference report, and I notice down there Alaska, which has a large number of Native folks living there. So we have also been disenfranchised. Since that court ruling, Texas has closed 750 polls, Arizona 320, Georgia 214. Many of these closed polling sites are in minority neighborhoods. Ms. Johnson-Blanco, have you seen an increase in the closing of polls in historically disenfranchised communities since the Shelby County decision?
We have indeed, and we've been working with our partners on the ground to, as much as we can, replace Section 5 in getting notice of when these polling places are expected to be closed, and have very effectively worked with communities on the ground to show the impact that it would have on them if the polling places were closed. And not just closed, but also moved. We had a situation in Macon and Bibb County, Georgia, where the plan was to move a polling place in an African-American community to the sheriff's office, despite the community's objections. And it's only after successfully petitioning against that they were able to stop that move to the sheriff's office. So what we're finding is that without Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, communities have to be extra vigilant to push back against these closures and their impact.
I think you've already talked a little bit about this, but what is the impact of these efforts on communities of color?
So communities of color are now finding that they have to do extra work to fight back against those who wish to suppress their vote. And this is not a burden that should be on those communities. Jurisdictions, particularly those with a history of discrimination in voting, should have to show the impact of laws like or actions like moving polling places before they can be allowed to do so.
Thank you. States have also restricted access to polls through onerous ID requirements and by limiting early voting in certain locations. For example, North Dakota passed a law in 2018 that required identification with a voter's current residential street address in order to vote, a requirement that excluded Native American communities on reservations that often do not have street addresses because they don't necessarily need them. Were it not for tribal leaders in those areas and to act fast and work extremely hard to enfranchise voters in these Native communities, Ruth Anna Buffalo, a Native American woman from the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara tribe, may not have been elected, thereby defeating the man who penned that oppressive bill. So sometimes democracy still does work in spite of the efforts that people go through to make it not work. Also in 2018, Florida tried to prevent public universities from hosting an early voting facilities. Early voting at Texas State University in San Marcos was limited to 3 days, while most other areas of state had 2 weeks. And Ms. Nash, thank you so much for your passionate testimony earlier. I'm very grateful to have you here. I wanted to ask you, why is early voting so important in protecting people's right to vote, especially in communities of color?
I am not an expert on what's happening right now with the voting, but I understand that there is heavier voting in communities of color during the early voting process. So that's a good thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Madam Chair, I yield back my time.
Yields back. Thank you. The gentleman from Missouri, Congressman Clay, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank